The one doubt we all have. Welcome to the House of Jenga, when faith falters because of just one brick. Today we're talking about when doubts are disturbing the equilibrium of our faith. I want to talk about the key question that everyone has to deal with and that threatens to undermine literally everyone's faith. I also want to talk about how we deal with the emotions that go alongside the intellectual questions we have of faith, and ask the question, how do we avoid catastrophizing so that we can avoid a complete collapse of faith? My name is Jools. Welcome to the House of Jenga. Welcome to dchurch.com. We've not asked for money before on this program, but if you would like to support this work, we could really use the help. So please head to the GoFundMe webpage. Just go there and type in dchurched.com. That's dchurched.com. And we'd love and appreciate your support for this program. Also, you can join us on our Facebook page. Just type in your search bar dchurch.com. We also have a sister program on a YouTube channel, and for that you just go to Julian Holdsworth, and that we have more videos and good content on there. If you'd like to contact me, you can contact me at jules@dchurch.com. I'd love to hear from you and hear what you're thinking about the programs and any questions and issues you might have. Well, that's enough housekeeping for now. Let's get on with the episode. Firstly, let me say this. This is not an apologetics program. There are plenty of scholars who do that work far more effectively than I ever could. If they are the specialist surgeons, I view myself perhaps more like a generalist doctor. They are the theologians. I just want to come alongside folks who are struggling. But from time to time I come across issues that I don't think often get addressed in such forums. It's a deeply pastoral issue that has great emotions attached to it. It's something common to human experience, and it's also an issue that is profoundly theological as well as pastoral. It goes like this. If this isn't true, then the whole house of cards falls down. If this, then that, is another way of putting it. I call it the Cascade Effect or House of Jenga. Philosophically, from a point of view of pure logic, it often doesn't make sense, but it feels like two things are connected and that the whole edifice is on the edge of collapse. We are one brick shy of the tower tumbling down. And this cascade effect seems to underlie the struggles so many have with faith. It seems to treat the construction of faith like a giant Jenga tower, but with just one brick at the bottom. And every time we come to a difficult question or set of questions, it's as though the tower is precariously balanced on just that one brick. And guess which that one brick is? Guess which question that is? It is the question that happens to be uppermost in our minds at the time. That is the one question that bugs everyone. That is the doubt that bugs everyone. Whichever one seems most threatening to you at that moment in time. But do you hear what happens there? It could be almost any question. So it's not the difficulty of the question, but the difficulty of the question for you. Like I say, it's deeply personal, and some difficulties with faith shout louder than others. The question of faith that most affects you will not be the same as someone else. And in fact, over a period of time, that question might be different for you too. For some, that one brick could be the question of a literal 6-day creation. For others, the question of textual variants in the New Testament manuscript record. For others, it's the problem of a good God in a dark and dangerous world. And for some, the question of violence and death in nature, the idea of God creating such a world, that last question for me haunted me for many years and created in me a deep sense of unease about the veracity of my faith. Now, I hope in mentioning all these, I've not given you more questions to worry about. The point is, for different people, different questions weigh heavily. And I mean heavily. It's a deeply emotional question rather than simply being a rational or logical one. As if we can ever fully separate out logic from emotions. Sorry, Mr. Spock. I was in conversation recently with someone for whom depression and suicidal thoughts had been triggered by concerns about the manuscript evidence of the first 5 books of the Bible. One person's whatever is another person's existential crisis. This person felt like his faith hung by a thread and life was quite literally not worth living without an answer to these questions. His logic was that if there were various authors working with these stories, they cannot be true, therefore Moses wasn't real, and all the rest is built on a house of Jenga. And the result for that person was despair, atheism, depression, suicidal thoughts, and so on and so forth. And they had gone down in that kind of spiral. Now, that I suspect is quite common for a number of people, maybe not to that extreme, but that sense of the house of cards, the house of Jenga, the tower that's about to fall on the basis of this one question. Those cascade type questions that are sometimes not simply about self-indulgent theologizing, but something that's real for real people and for whom the whole edifice of their faith stands or falls on resolving these issues. You can argue about the theology of this or that, but sooner or later another question becomes the one question, and it becomes like a whack-a-mole game. But I want to suggest to you that there is something deeper going on than will be resolved by simply answering the questions. Don't get me wrong, I believe there are clues and hints to life's biggest questions within the Christian faith. However, getting answers is a poor second place to this, encountering presence. You may have heard me say before that Job had some really great questions for God, but when he encountered God, the Lord had even better ones of him. And it wasn't in getting answers to his questions, though, through which the angst and anxiety of Job was resolved, but simply by encountering God. Now, to some extent, we can't control that sense of a God encounter, though I have spoken in earlier podcasts about doing our part in positioning ourselves to give noticing God or encountering God a red hot go. Habits, for example, that we can cultivate that stack the deck, as it were. But what do you do if that cascade effect, that Jenga effect, is undermining your sense of spiritual well-being? How do you resolve what psychologists call cognitive dissonance? Just in case you haven't heard the term before, cognitive dissonance is when a person holds 2 or more contradictory beliefs, ideas, or values, or participates in an action that goes against one of those beliefs, ideas, or values. The result of such a situation is psychological stress. In layman's terms, you feel caught between a rock and a hard place, and you feel you have to choose between one or the other. And the discomfort, the cognitive dissonance caused by these contradictory beliefs will drive us to try and resolve the tension and the stress. Now, you can try and do that a number of different ways. One is to reject belief A and accept belief B. Another approach is to find a way to fuse the 2 beliefs into a hybrid or synthesis. This, however, is often not possible. In the example I mentioned earlier, you can't hold to a literal 24-hour, 6-day creation happening a few thousand years ago and also view that the planet is billions of years old, with life forms existing for millions of years. So how do we resolve cognitive dissonance? It sounds like you only have 2 options. accept one belief out of the two, or synthesize the two beliefs. But there is actually a third way that isn't often spoken about. It is the acceptance of our creatureliness. Let me explain. We've grown up during the modern era when science moved forwards in leaps and bounds. We hate not having answers, and so we set out to discover them. This is like the air we breathe. It's not unique to modernity, but it certainly got dialed up to 10 in the last few hundred years. We want to know stuff. We don't like not knowing the answers. We have had so much success in discoveries in all the sciences and in the humanities that we have a hard job accepting lack of closure or lack of answers. But here's the thing. While we should theologize and seek answers philosophically about life's big questions, we also have to recognize that if there is a God, we will always have more questions than answers. In other words, if God exists and I am not God, there will always be things I don't understand. That is what I call creatureliness. It is in our nature to both have lots of questions, but also, because of our nature, to not have the capacity for all the answers. We are given enough to go on, but never, never, never enough to totally satisfy. You may have heard me say in other programs that faith means living with unanswered questions. Here's the thing, that's just as true for the atheist. The person considering any philosophy of life must learn to live with unanswered questions. Life is a journey of faith, which means we give it our best guess and we get on with it. The agnostic, in having a mañana approach to life, is acting with a faith that hopes things will work out. Questions are often just left. And that, of course, lumps all agnostics into one category, but I hope you get my drift. We all make our best guess and live with it. Likewise, the atheist is also left with questions. For example, what is the meaning and purpose of life in a vast universe that really doesn't care about such things and doesn't care what this microscopic human life thinks about it? Meanwhile, though, in the background there is this sense we all have that meaning is important and should be found. So, my point in all this is that unanswered questions are part of life. Our worldview, though, just makes that harder to cope with and magnifies certain questions out of proportion. Thus, the Jenga effect. One of the things I've come across with the Cascade Effect among believers is that so often it takes a theory about the whole Bible and how it should work and starts from there. It starts from a set of assumptions, often fundamentalist, but not always. Assumptions about how God would and should reveal himself through a book and what that would look like. I kind of want to start from a different point. Start from the one around which the whole Bible pivots. Start with a person rather than a set of words. You see, if you start with a view of how God should work through a book or language construct or culture, rather than starting by looking at the one to whom that book points, you can end up with the Cascade Effect. And this effect potentially makes that one problem you have the straw that breaks the camel's back. There is a view of the Bible that wants all the loose ends tied up neatly into a systematic approach that our minds can somehow grasp. And the problem with that kind of view is that it's like a spaghetti sandwich. You squeeze it in one side and it leaks out the other. And those leaky bits get us upset in a mess of existential angst. Yes, the Bible is a whole, and yes, we may view it as inspired and authoritative. Yes, we may see it as painting a cohesive picture of God's interactions with humanity. But let's be careful of how we think of it. It's not a complex machine which, with enough engineering and knowledge about engineering, we can know what each part is for and precisely what it means and lock it all down into a formula. That's to kind of view the Bible like perhaps a motor engine. The point of the Bible is to ask rather, to whom does it point? The motor is the power which enables us to get from A to B. It is not the end destination. Of course, if you are a gearhead, you want to know what each part's function is and how it relates to the whole. And that has its place. I didn't spend 3 years learning Greek not to be a bit that way myself. But if you're struggling, let's change the image. The image that we have of this compendium of 66 books or so. Better than a machine analogy would be if we viewed the Bible like an exhibition in an art gallery with a whole series of paintings around the same theme. Some are abstract, some are impressionist, some more literal, but they are all in 3 dimensions or possibly 2 dimensions. But they are artworks pointing to a common reality. The best and most authoritative pieces of artwork perhaps, but artworks nonetheless, not that to which they point. So for example, when we talk about Matthew's Gospel, it has things to say about Jesus that are far more important and authoritative than, say, a 2nd or 3rd century Gnostic Gospel. It is an authoritative work on the life of Jesus. But it is nevertheless art, not the thing in itself. The artworks, if you like, are, to change the analogy, signposts towards the real thing. It's that reality that is the real thing, and that's what counts. So when you think of that big issue that haunts your theological nightmares, and I've got a number of them myself, treat it like an anxious thought or feeling, because it's as much to do with a feeling as anything else. Acknowledge its presence. Let it sit there. But notice also all the positive things you still hold on to with regard to your faith. What are those positive things? They might be any number of things. For me, it would be beauty or the wisdom and wonder of Jesus the teacher, Jesus' integrity of life and the overwhelming evidence for his victory over death. For you, it might be something different, an experience of transcendence or the beauty or something you sense within a friendship or a conversation, or moments when you've been kind or others have been generous to you and you've noticed the sense of the divine presence. Now, focusing on such things is not just whistling in the dark. Many atheists would like to say this. It is a way of both acknowledging the doubts, but saying there is enough here to enable me to keep on going with this strange and wondrous Galilean rabbi. Sometimes we just have to sit with the dissonance. The Cascade Effect may feel very real. As humans, if we are anxious, we have a tendency to catastrophize. So be aware of that too. Breathe. Notice it. Acknowledge its presence, the presence of a hard question that screams at your emotions sometimes. But what I would say this, very simply, is resolve what you can. Seek wiser theological heads to help you do this. But when you're tempted to throw it all in because of the unanswered questions, look at Jesus, the one to whom it all points. I almost don't like saying that because it sounds cheap, cliched, and has become simplistic in our cultures. But I can honestly tell you from personal experience, you do not need to press the nuclear trigger on your faith. I've tried a couple of times, but you don't need to do it for any one theological issue. Some issues will linger, but they'll diminish in strength over time. I've found that to be true also. Other issues you will find answers that satisfy you mentally, logically, theologically, but also emotionally. Other answers you'll never know. But if you're willing to keep looking at Jesus, not that difficult verse in Leviticus or whatever it is, then you will come to a place of peace, perhaps very slowly, and perhaps even over a number of years. But that process is part of recognizing, perhaps for the first time, that I'm not God and I need to trust. I am a creature and not the creator. I don't need to be a modern Westerner who has all his questions answered. I am content. I'd love to hear from you and chat. If there is anything I've said that raises questions, please contact me at Jools@dchurch.com. This is dchurch.com, and don't forget to click the like button and to subscribe. Thanks for listening.